The time has come to tell the tale.
So, Mr. Mac.
Yes, Mr. Bangers?
Stop me if you heard this one. A pair of teenagers.
I've heard it.
Go out to Lover's Lane. Every town's got a Lover's Lane. A pair of teenagers, a boy, girl. Or I guess it could be two dudes. This is the 21st century we're in after all.
Why not two girls?
Could be two girls? Yeah, sure. Okay, so two chicks.
Why not a guy and a dog?
You're totally fucking up my intro. These two teenagers are at Lover's Lane, and they're making out. It's getting pretty heavy. They've got the radio on for mood music, of course. You gotta have a little mood music to set the mood. That's why they call it mood music.
And is it really?
Yeah. Big hits of today and yesterday. They stopped that for a special report.
Oh gosh, this is a nail-biter.
Special report about how there has been a breakout at the local prison for the criminally insane. They've managed to round up most of the crazies, except for one. You've totally screwed up my intro here. This is going to be really atmospheric and good, and you're just fucking it. You're fucking it in the ass. They managed to get all the psychos except for one. Can identify this man very easily because instead of a hand, he has a hook. Ginny's getting freaked out, but Billy's like, nah, baby, it's cool. Don't worry about it. What are the odds that he's going to find us here? What are the odds that he's going to be in this area? So, yeah, it's cool. Come on, let me touch your boobs. Go back to the mood music, and Ginny is letting Billy touch her boobs just because...
Wow, wow, boom, boom.
She figures if she lets that happen, they can get out of there sooner. And that's when she hears a noise. She freaks out. Billy, we gotta go. No, baby, it's cool. It's just the wind. Chill out, baby. All right. They go back to making out. But then again, a few minutes later, they hear... Billy keeps pushing. Ginny's like, no, come on, Billy. I'm not in the mood now. That's when they hear the noise again. They hear... One more time. Okay, this is it. We gotta go, Billy. He's real pissed off. There's nothing more upsetting to a teenager than having his boner ruined. Fine, whatever. Let's get out of here. So he speeds up the car real quick and tears out of there. They drive back to her place, her parents' place, and on the way there, Billy's thought about it, and he's like, oh, all right, okay, well, I shouldn't throw away a good thing here. But he's gonna be a gentleman. He's gonna get out, and he's gonna go around and open her door for her. So he gets out, he walks around the car, and he goes to open her door, and hanging from the door of the car is a bloody hook! Listeners, welcome once again to the Bangers and Mash Show. What's our topic today, Mr. Bangers?
Barney the Purple Dinosaur?
No, it's not Barney the Purple Dinosaur.
Oh, then it has to be choice B. Urban legends.
Yeah, we're talking about urban legend. This is a favorite topic of mine, and actually, this is fake, JD. About a month ago, I had a dream that there was a podcast on YouTube about urban legends. And when I looked it up and saw that there isn't actually a podcast on YouTube about urban legends, I thought to myself, this is a sign from God that we have to do this.
Basically, since Martin Luther King Day was just right around the corner, what you're saying is you had a dream!
Yes, JD, I had a dream. Urban Legends covers a wide spectrum of topics, as 10 seasons of Mythbusters prove. Obviously, there are myths about politicians and technology and celebrities. No, Jamie Lee Curtis is, as far as we know, not a hermaphrodite. We're focusing on one very specific, iconic aspect of urban legends, and that's the urban legend horror story. Bad things that happened to my brother's uncle's hairdresser's half-niece. Someone you know. The legend I laid on you just now, I'm sure everybody listening to this is familiar with it. It's, of course, the legend of the Hook. Now, would you say this is the most famous urban legend in the world, JD?
I don't know if it's the most famous, but it's pretty famous.
It seems to me this is kind of like urban legend ground zero. This is the one that everybody knows. Now, what do you think this means on a cultural level? Because the thing with urban legends is these stories start somewhere, and then they spread from person to person in a pre-internet age. These stories wouldn't propagate like this unless they hit on some nerve. So why do you think this particular tale of the Hook is so iconic and popular and well known?
Because it's a better kill, literally.
That's subtle. Insightful.
You're the insightful one. I'm just a stupid one that gives my 2 cents every now and then. I guess it's the fact you just hear that scraping noise, you don't really know what's out there, you know, is that the wind blowing a branch up against the door, the serial killer out there. They've thought twice about it if they hadn't heard the news program about the hook-handed villain escaping from the madhouse.
Which seems unlikely. Not a very realistic situation.
What if they hadn't heard that? Would he have killed them? Would he not have killed them? It's like the theory of the unknown.
Well, in some variations of the myth, the the killer does kill them, or kills the boyfriend. Some versions don't have the hook on the car, some versions you don't hear the scraping. There are variations on all of these things. But the version I told is the one I've always heard, is the most famous.
That seems to be the most popular.
Some people have read into this. They've read this as a cautionary tale to teenage girls about their handy boyfriends. Keep a leash on your boyfriends, ladies, because if you don't, you'll get murdered by a maniac with a hook for a hand. I even read one version that said that the hook itself is kind of a twisted phallic symbol. The man getting his hand torn off at the end is kind of a castration.
Somebody's reading into that too much.
I don't think so. Maybe, but it's kind of an interesting thought. This is a story about teenage sexuality and how you should be careful. Basically saying to necking teens, don't go any further, then don't do something you're going to regret. Pretty obvious message about don't go out necking with your boyfriend at Lover's Lane. Do kids do that? I don't know if kids really still do that. This dates back to the 1950s. At the earliest, folklorists, the people who track these things, can date the story back to at least the 1950s. They actually think they found the origin for this. And that's the big thing about most urban legends, is they have some sort of basis in reality. Somewhere far off, they have a basis in reality. And they've traced this back to what was known at the time as the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. And this happened from February 22nd to May 3rd in 1946. The town of Texarkana, which is on the border between Texas and Arkansas.
Is it really?
What really happened is these teenagers were out necking in the forest when a man with a hood on his head broke through the window and pulled the guy out of the truck and started beating him. And there were murders that followed up. Shooting murders that followed with this person in this hood that was going around shooting people in the woods. And they actually made a movie about it called The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which I recommend you go see. It's actually a pretty good film. It's getting a DVD release from Scream Factory later in the year. Over the years, somehow the hook hand got in there, and it became this iconic legend. And of course, it's not true at all. There's been no actual reports of a hook-handed serial killer ever. Real hook hands don't work that way. And these days, I don't think they give prosthetic hooks. They just give prosthetic hands. I don't think you see
Well,
that.
for people who can't afford them, they still get the hooks.
They're more like tweezers. You know, that's what I've always said. I've never seen like a pirate hook on anybody. You know?
Oh, no pirate hook or anything.
In my opinion, this is the most famous urban legend in the world. I feel like it is. This is the go-to campfire story in a bunch of movies. How many films can you name off the top of your head that owe something to the story?
I Know What You Did Last Summer.
That's the big one.
Urban Legends.
Obviously.
Did Campfire Tales have one?
Both versions of Campfire Tales open with a telling of the hook. The 1991 movie called Campfire Tales and the 1997 both start with a variation on the story. And Candyman is kind of a variation on it.
I mean, loose.
He has a hook for a hand, though, so it's in there. There's a movie called Lover's Lane that I've never seen that apparently is about a hook-handed killer. Apparently, they did an episode of X-Files, covered this, Supernatural, covered this. I haven't seen either of those. In Meatballs, Bill Murray tells the story around the campfire to the campers. And do you remember the episode of Roseanne where Dan and DJ are camping in the tent out front and he tells the hook-handed killer story to DJ? You remember that?
No.
The only reason I bring that up is I've seen it on TV Land twice in the last month. I don't know why. Moving on. Have you heard about this, JD?
Bloody Mary.
This is the version of this particular tale I've always heard. You go into a dark room with a mirror. Not necessarily a bathroom, usually a bathroom.
Shut off the light.
You shut off the lights, and then you look in the mirror and you say the name.
Bloody Mary 5 times.
5 times? 8 times? 10 times? I always heard 10 as a kid.
I've always heard 5.
Okay.
So we'll be in the middle, say 8.
You say Bloody Mary 7.5 times in the mirror, and a ghastly female face will appear in the mirror and do something.
And drag you into the mirror dimension.
Really? Okay.
The one I've always heard is that you say that, and then the spirit of Bloody Mary, if you will, appears in the mirror and breaks through the mirror, grabs you, and pulls you in.
Well, I always heard that she'll kill you. Never specified what would happen. I always heard that the spirit will kill you if you do this. So why would anybody do it?
Since we've seen Night of the Demons, we know that what happens when you say Bloody Mary 5 times in the mirror. Everybody in your party gets possessed.
I forgot about Night of the Demons, but yeah, that's in there, isn't it?
I'm like a Night of the Demons aficionado. Of course I know that.
And I've heard variations where you have to spin first. You have to spin around in a circle a couple of times.
I don't know that I've heard that.
And then say the name. Apparently, the earliest version is that the spirit will appear in the mirror and predict your future, is the earliest version of Bloody Mary that's on record from the 1940s. But I've also heard that she'll scratch your face off, that she'll scream at you, that she'll strangle you, something bad will happen.
Now, I've always heard dragging to like the mirror.
Okay. Apparently, at one point, was popular among tween-age girls at slumber parties to do this. Having not been tween-aged girls at any point in our lives, we can't attest to that. Have you done this?
I've said Candyman 5 times.
Did Tony Todd appear to you?
No. Jerk. I mean, what do I have to do? Call him up on a cell phone? I mean, that's so primitive.
If you make a sandwich for him, he'll probably show up. It's a very well-known story, but there doesn't really seem to be a lot of consensus on what happens. Nobody can agree on what happens when you say Bloody Mary. They can't even agree on how many times you say it in the mirror.
I think the standard is 5, though. I've always heard 5.
Okay.
And, like, even with Candyman, which is a pretty clear ripoff of the Bloody Mary tale.
Heavily inspired by.
Or a very clear ripoff, like I said. God.
Obviously, Candyman was inspired by Bloody Mary, but Bloody Mary is a female figure, and Candyman is a black dude in a pimp coat with a hook hand with bees on him. Kind of different, though. What is Bloody Mary herself? That's another thing that varies. What have you heard?
I've always heard that she was an old witch that died or something, is stuck in the mirror dimension or something.
Somehow, for some reason.
Well, like the mirror dimension limbo or something.
Okay. Why is she bloody?
Well, I think they call her Bloody Mary because
she kills you.
She kills you.
Okay. I was always told that she was covered in cut. That she was a girl that killed herself for some reason and now is haunting mirrors. I don't know why. Now, there are variations that say she's a witch, she's a ghost, she's a corpse.
How do you know she's not a ghost of a witch?
I suppose we don't know. There's something about dead babies. Some variations of the tale involve taunting this nebulous, all-powerful being about her dead babies, which seems ill-advised.
Yeah, why would you taunt?
Well, why would you do this anyway? Why do people do it? I've never done it. I've never known anybody who does it. Obviously, it's happened.
To see what happens.
I guess to see what happens.
On the other hand, do you really want to see what happens?
This has always been my thing.
My irrational fear is the unknown, as I call it.
Hands coming out of walls.
Oh. Thanks for that, Zach.
There's actually a scientific explanation for this.
Is it scientific or Freudian?
No, it's actually scientific. It's not Freudian. A bunch of scientists actually did a test where they got some people together and they made them stare into mirrors for an extended period of time. And basically they said if you stare into anything long enough, your vision will start to distort and you will see things. And this is called the Troxler effect. Basically, our brain is wired to stop taking in repeated information after a certain amount of time. If you focus on a central point, we'll start to blur eventually.
In this magazine I saw, they had this thing where you stared at a negative picture of this woman, and next to it they had this gray box.
Okay.
And you're supposed to stare at this point on the negative picture's nose for like 30 seconds, and then you look over at the gray box, and you see the actual picture in color and everything, and it's wild.
It's the same thing.
I don't know how that works.
It's the same effect, yeah. Your brain is only designed to absorb so much information at any given point, and they claim that this is because of that. You'll see a distorted face in the mirror, which seems like as good as an explanation as any. I don't know what it is about teenage girls, this need to scare each other. I feel like Ouija boards evolve out of the same tendency. For some reason, the spirit world is our personal plaything.
Me personally, I've seen what happens when you play with a Ouija board, and I want nothing to do with it.
You've mentioned your fear of Ouija boards before, even though they mass-produce them in Taiwan, and you can buy them at Walmart.
It's not what it's made out of, Zach. The power and the belief that you put behind it.
Yeah, I know.
Ritual is a powerful thing, Zach.
It is. I've said that to you. Rituals are incredibly powerful. Really believe in the Ouija board. Some people do. George Norrie of Coast to Coast AM won't touch them. He's scared shitless of them. There's been some movies. We've already discussed Candyman. Have you seen it recently? It's a good film.
It is. It's good.
It
has good atmosphere.
It does. Fuck you. There was a film made in 2006 called Bloody Mary. There was a film in 2008 called Legend of Bloody Mary. In Urban Legend 3, Bloody Mary. And I haven't seen any of the Urban Legend movies besides the first one, which I really didn't like very much. This is even more disconnected from those first two films. It was a direct-to-video sequel about 10 years after the last one.
Yeah, and it didn't have anything at all.
First films were not supernatural in any way, and this one obviously is. I haven't seen an episode of X-Files did this, an episode of Charmed dealt with this. I didn't watch Charmed. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that episode.
Episode of Supernatural covered this. Ghost Whisperer. So it's pretty well known. There's some connection with Queen Mary the First of Britain, because she was known as Bloody Mary historically because she always miscarried. She couldn't give the king an heir. So maybe that's what the dead baby thing comes from. It's
maybe.
Queen Mary First. You got this shit you read on Wikipedia. It's an old urban legend. This goes back to at least the 1940s and probably earlier. There are actually two variations on this next one, JD. Tell me if you've heard both of these. A woman is driving at night from somewhere, from some destination to another destination. She's driving along when behind her, in her rearview mirror, a large truck, tractor and trailer or a pickup truck, something of that nature. It starts honking its horn at her. It starts flashing its high beam. In some variations, the truck even rear ends her. And obviously, this freaks her out and upsets her. And eventually, she stops her car and gets out, and the guy behind her stops and gets out. She basically asks him what the hell is he doing? What's his problem? Tells her, I was flashing my high beams because there's something in your back seat. And as long as I kept flashing my high beams, he wouldn't jump out and kill you. And of course, he's right. There's an escaped lunatic or a serial killer or a serial rapist.
That's not the version I've heard.
I hadn't heard this one, but apparently this is a well-known variation on the story, which is the ubiquitous killer in the back seat. Now, the version I've always heard is a woman is driving down the road from one destination to another, and she stops at a gas station.
This is the one I've heard.
She pays for her gas when the gas attendant comes on over the speaker and tells her to come into the building because he has to talk to her about her bill, and she doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't really understand why. As she walks into the building, the guy tells her the real reason you're in here is because I saw something in your backseat, a man in your backseat. Sometimes he has a weapon, sometimes he doesn't. Why the killer is in the backseat varies. The version that is frequent today is that it's a gang member, and some sort of gang initiation here member, in order to get into the gang, has to murder, cut a body part off of, rape a white woman in a well-lit area. Have you heard that particular variation on this?
I've heard a different variation of the gas station one.
Okay, what's that?
She doesn't get warned. She has to go inside and pay for the gas, and then she comes out and she's riding down the road, and she thinks she sees something in her back seat, and she shrugs it off, and then the killer comes out with an axe and chops her head off.
The variations of the urban legends where the person dies really kind of raises the question, well, where did you hear this from? And today, the whole thing about going inside to pay for your gas. Every gas station has a credit card reader at the pump. A lot of these urban legends are being proved obsolete by the onward march of technology. Both of these variations on this story, it's sexism and racism is what these stories are about to me.
I will tell you, this is one of the reasons why every time I go out to my car, I always check my back seat before I get in it.
Oh yeah, I do the same thing. I always check the back seat. And it's stupid. It doesn't make any sense, but we do it anyway.
I would rather know than not know.
I always lock my doors. I don't know how somebody's going to get into the back seat. We do it anyway because we're horror nerds. The shit has been absorbed into our brain. Is a part of our psyche now. Sexism and racism, that's what I mean. Because in the first variation, the high beams variation, basically this says a woman can't take care of herself. She needs a man to protect her. Women are prone to panic. That doesn't really say a lot of positive things. And then the second one about the gang initiation, that is super racist. Especially the variation about the black gang member has to rape a white woman. Jesus Christ, society, dial it back some. As if all gang members are black. There are white gangs out there. Hate to break it to you. They exist. Stupidity and ignorance comes in all colors. The thing with this legend is, it is alive in our modern age. Now, you read these and you assume most of these are discredited. Nobody can hear these and believe they're real, right?
Right.
Back in high school, I was in my journalism class when the teacher was checking her emails and came out to us and said, I just read this in an email, I have to tell you all this. And she read the email directly to us about how their gang members are going around sneaking into women's cars and raping white women. Ladies, be careful. Nobody in the class was going, that's bullshit, and an obvious urban legend has never ever actually happened. They were super serious and believed this, and when I had to say, Miss whatever, this is bullshit. So thanks to email and grandmothers that forward all their emails, this legend survives into this modern day. It just blows my mind that there are people out there who haven't heard this.
There's like a variation that was going around when we were in school. It's like a very loose variation. The gang members, part of their initiation was they had to ride down the road with their headlights off.
And if you flash your high beams at them,
they would like
kill
run you off the road or something and kill you.
Yeah, I was going to get to that next. These gangs with their deadly initiation, a lot of urban legends are based off of that. Have you heard the ankle slasher variation of the story? And it's kind of a variation. It's in a similar vein.
He just hides underneath the car.
Yeah, a woman goes out to a parking lot. It's always a woman. Always a woman. She goes out to a parking lot after work, and the gang members hide underneath the cars and cut your ankles with a knife and then murder you. And it's a gang initiation. In real life, most gang initiations are basically the new guy just gets the shit kicked out of him by the established member. Or you do a bunch of drugs or something. That's usually what initiations are. They're not this elaborate and murderous in real life. This is another well-known one. At the beginning of the movie Urban Legends is pretty much this legend directly, featuring Brad Dourif as the creepy gas station attendant.
I wish they would take the killer in the backseat idea and just run with it for a whole movie. I think that would be an interesting thing for them to try and do. That's the killer's MO, as he has in the backseat.
I don't know if they've ever done a whole movie based off of this. It would surprise me if they didn't, though. It seems like a conclusion somebody would have come to. Remember the show Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction with Jonathan Frakes?
Oh yeah, where they did nothing but urban legends and
pretty much
proving them or disproving them.
Well, yeah, it was basically a horror anthology show. But then at the end of the episode, there would be this gimmick where Jonathan Frakes would say, did you guess if this one was true or not? Well, guess what? It's true, even if it isn't. I don't think any of them were actually true. Yeah, they did an episode that used the high beams variation on the story, and that was the first time I heard that particular take on it. There's an anthology film from the 80s, I believe, called Nightmares, and each of the stories are based off of urban legends. First story in the movie is pretty much this direct. That movie was unused stories from the anthology series Dark Room. It was hosted by James Coburn. It was very short-lived. The second one had Emilio Estevez, and it was the killer video game myth. Are you familiar with the killer video game myth?
No.
You don't know this one? Okay, well, the killer video game myth, it's gotten way more specific in the internet age. This is one that's really caught on in the internet age. Supposedly there's an arcade game that's so intense, it'll kill you. And nowadays, it generally has the name Polybius or Polybius, very popular urban legend on the internet. Tied it into, it was engineered by the government as psychological warfare. Some stories even say it was programmed by Miyamoto, the guy who made Mario and Donkey Kong. One of the classic urban legends that have really taken off in the modern age, the killer video game. They cover that in the movie Nightmares, and they do a self-propelled killer truck, a demonic black pickup truck versus Lance Ingridson. It's never been released on DVD, but I recommend checking out Nightmares. That was a bit of a divergence there.
Well, wait. There's more.
There's more. We opened the episode by discussing the necking teenagers in the car being interrupted by the hook. But there's another story where necking teenagers are interrupted. Teenagers go to Lover's Lane and they're making out when they hear a noise outside. And the boyfriend says to the girl, okay, you stay here, and no matter what you hear, you stay inside the vehicle. I'm gonna go check this out because I'm the man.
Famous last words.
The boyfriend leaves the girl alone in the car, locks it, and goes outside. She starts hearing a noise. It varies, but usually it's a scratching on the roof of the car. And she starts to freak out. Sometimes she sees things around the car. How the story ends varies a great deal. In the version I always heard, the girl's in the car, and she has to deal with this horrible noise all night, where eventually she's just in the fetal position in the backseat, covering her eyes, weeping. In the morning, the cops come. They open the door and get her out, and she steps out, and they say, "Don't look behind you. Whatever you do, don't look behind you," as she walks from the car to the police. Of course, she doesn't listen. And halfway, she stops and turns around. Boyfriend has been murdered and strung up over the car, and the sound she's been hearing all night is her dead boyfriend's fingernails scraping across the roof of the car. Now, see,
the version I've always heard is he was hanging from his neck and his toenails scraping.
Now, that's the variation of the story I'd always heard, but there are a bunch. Sometimes, when I looked this up on the internet, the first version I found was the girl's in the backseat freaking out when she sees a guy, the area around the car, and the legend ended with the killer walking up to the window, tapping the window and holding up the car keys. Or sometimes both the car keys and the boyfriend's head. Or sometimes she steps outside and the killer is on the roof of the car with the boyfriend's head in his hand, banging the head on the roof. Or sometimes, this is a particular clever variation, the boyfriend's decapitated head is impaled on the antenna and the noise she hears is the blood dripping. Or sometimes his throat's been slashed and the blood is dripping on the roof.
Well, for starters, that one makes no sense. Because physics doesn't have anything to do with that. The weight of the head would ultimately weigh down the antenna.
I'm so glad you're here to explain physics to our listeners.
Gravity and weight factor there.
You telling me an urban legend doesn't make sense?
Most of them don't make sense. That one's way out there.
Speaking of things that don't make any sense, sometimes when she turns around, sometimes what she sees horrifies her so much she's stunned into silence for the rest of her life, and her hair turns white prematurely. Which is another thing that happens a lot in urban legends that I'm pretty sure is not actually possible. Sometimes this story is incorporated with other ones. As we've already mentioned, the hook-handed man is sometimes involved. A local example, in Beltsville, Maryland, which is very close, nearby, there's a cryptic-type critter called the Goat Man, which is half man, half goat, and carries an axe and terrorizes teenagers.
So it's a satyr.
Pretty much. And sometimes he is involved in this legend. I've heard variations that feature the Goat Man. So what is it with cars and necking teenagers in these urban legends?
It's stories that parents came up with to prevent kids from having sex. When in all actuality, they should be explaining to them the uses of a condom. That way they don't have to deal with a grandbaby when they're 40 years old.
It's obviously a lot more fun to tell your kids that the
Goat Man will get you if you fuck your girlfriend in your car.
If you stain the upholstery, the Goat Man will get you.
Yes.
And it seems like these sanitariums must have really shitty security, because killers are always getting out. To hell. But this has been featured in several movies. It was featured in Urban Legends, and it was featured in the 1997 Campfire Tales in a wildly altered version, where it was a married couple in an RV.
And there was demons.
Yeah, demons. Which totally negates the horror of the dead boyfriend if you're throwing in monsters. So you've seen the 1997 Campfire Tales.
Yes, I haven't seen the original, though, I don't think.
They're not remakes. I didn't like it.
It's been like 12 years since I've seen it, dude.
I didn't like Campfire Tales from 97 very much, because it's such a cool idea and I thought it was executed poorly. So we're not quite done with urban legends set in cars yet. There are a lot of them set in cars.
Would it make sense for all these things to take place in a house? The hook? That would make sense for the hook to take place in a house.
People feel safe in their homes.
Exactly. Feel less secure when you're out in a car in an unknown area.
Let me tell you, listeners, way more people die crashing their cars than getting slashed to death. This next one, if the hook isn't the most famous urban legend in the world, this one probably is. And what's interesting about this one is the protagonist is almost always a man. A guy is driving from one destination to another, usually home from work, and he sees a hitchhiker on the side of the road, usually a young one. The guy stops his car, pulls over, and lets the young girl get in. He asks her where she's coming from, where's she going, why is she walking around on the side of the road in the middle of the night. Usually she doesn't say very much. The version I always heard is, you need to drop me off up here in a couple of miles. He gets to the location, and it's a graveyard. It's a cemetery. And he stops, and the girl vanishes, just disappears. And the version I always heard, she leaves a letter behind that has an address on it. And he goes to this address, and it's these parents. Their daughter recently died. Basically, for whatever reason, the ghost of this young girl was communicating with this man to get this message out to her parents. Now, there are a bunch of variations on this one. That's the version I've always heard of the Vanishing Hitchhiker.
The version I've always heard wasn't so much a vanishing hitchhiker. It was more like the hitchhiker with the head in the bag.
The murderous hitchhiker.
Guy picks up this guy that's hitchhiking, of course. Hitchhiker.
A doy.
He's riding down the road with this guy. I guess like 100 miles away or whatever. Just going to drop him off in the closest location on his way. He notices that he's carrying this bag. He keeps asking him, what's in the bag? You'll see. A few miles later, seriously, man, what's in the bag? You'll see. And then finally he goes, you want to see what's in my bag?
Opens
the bag, and there's a head, and the guy is shocked in fear, and then he disappears.
Interesting. The moral behind that one's pretty obvious. Don't pick up hitchhikers. But there are a bunch of variations of the story. Sometimes she vanishes when they reach the destination. Usually it's a graveyard. Sometimes it's a home. Sometimes she leaves behind an item. Sometimes the girl was actually murdered. The nondescript place she stops at is either the home of her killer or where her body is buried. In which case, this becomes a ghost story about the ghost solving its own murder. And then sometimes I've heard that the ghost kills the driver. That this is a murderous specter. Sometimes the ghost predicts the driver's own death, which in some variations happens immediately when she disappears and the guy is so shocked that he wrecks his car and dies.
That's probably the most likely cause.
Now,
because if a bitch disappeared from my sight like that, I'd be like, what?
I would at least pull over. I wouldn't pick up a hitchhiker, though. You want to talk about some sexist themes. Maybe the dude picks up the hitchhiker because she's a young, attractive girl.
Today's age, who says it has to be a female hitchhiker? Why couldn't it be a hooker? No, but I'm being serious. Like,
ghost hooker!
Well, no, why couldn't he pick her up looking for a good time, and then they go around the corner and disappears?
Usually, she disappears with your money.
You would know that.
This is an urban legend that steps into the area of the supernatural, why the previous three we discussed did not. Now, that brings up an interesting question. So, what's the origin behind this? Is the moral just don't pick up hitchhikers? Because if the ghost is solving her own murder, it doesn't seem to be.
Well, I think at least the version where he goes to the parents' house and finds out that she had died 10 years ago, I think that one could be loosely based on some teenage girl that got murdered at some time.
Well, this dates back to the 50s.
Based on some actual murder that has gotten twisted into this ghost story.
The thing that's really interesting about this is there are a lot of local variations. One of the most famous versions calls her Resurrection Mary, and it's set in Justice, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago. And it links it to the Resurrection Cemetery, specifically. And there are other specific versions. In Brazil, they have a legend of the Midnight Beauty of the same story. In Britain and France, there are two different ghosts, both called the White Lady. There's a ghost that does the same thing in Niles Canyon in Northern California. So this is one that has really caught people's attention, and it seems like every state has their own version of the Vanishing Hitchhiker. And this story is such a well-known urban legend that a very well-known important book about urban legends by John Harold Brom Van is actually called The Vanishing Hitchhiker. There's a very famous short film starring Orson Welles that's a straight-up adaptation of the story called Return to
Glennis Cole.
It was actually nominated for an Oscar. Apparently the premiere episode of Supernatural did a variation on this. I've never seen Supernatural. Reading about all these episodes they've done based off urban legends kind of makes me want to watch it.
But it's hard to get into.
Moving out of cars. If you want me to put my cultural analysis hat on for a few seconds, a lot of these urban legends originate in the 50s. The 50s is when America became a car culture. Post-World War II, they built the International Freeway, and suddenly everybody had to own a car. So it just seems to me that a lot of these urban legends seem to originate around the same time that we became an automobile society, which is interesting to me. And maybe that makes sense because we were driving long distances for the first time and leaving our homes and really traveling around the country as a culture for the first time. Maybe there's some link there.
Maybe.
Going into an unknown area and discovering terrifying things. Moving on to a different legend that also dates back to the 50s that is also extremely well known. Stop me if you've heard this one, JD. A babysitter is doing her work, goes to a house at night, and the parents tell her, tuck the kids...
Wait, stop. I've heard this one.
Tuck the kids into bed, and we're gonna go out and do whatever it is we're gonna do. Get dinner.
We're going to Lover's Lane.
Yeah. Go get dinner, run a hotel room, and fuck each other's brains out. I don't know, whatever it is. Anyway, a teenage girl is watching these kids at night, and she's doing what young girls do when they have a house with themselves. It seems to usually be raiding the fridge or talking to their friends and running up the phone bill. That seems to be the cliched, stereotypical version. But she starts getting phone calls. Sometimes it's just a man breathing heavily into the phone, which we would have a lot of experience with. Sometimes he says something specific. Have you checked the children? Or go check the children? Sometimes he gives us time. He keeps saying 10 o'clock or 10:30. Eventually, this distresses the young woman so much that she calls the police. After the calls intensify and become more upsetting, the cops call her in a panic state and say, get out of the house. The call is coming from inside of the house. Woo! And what happens next varies.
Or isn't there one variation where she checks the caller ID and it says the calls are coming from inside the house?
That would make sense to me because caller ID probably makes this story somewhat obsolete. In the modern era of caller ID and cell phones, this one would be harder to pull off, I'd think.
I just don't understand the caller ID one anyway. She looks down at the caller ID and realizes that the calls are coming from
Most
inside
people
the
check
house.
it before they answer the phone.
Well, not only that, but caller ID doesn't work that way. Like, it doesn't say...
There was a time when a home having 2 phone lines is very common. Some variations, it ends with her going up and checking the children to see that the children are murdered, and then she realizes the killer is inside of the house. And sometimes she doesn't live. Sometimes the killer gets here, sometimes the cop comes and save the day, sometimes the kids are already dead, sometimes they aren't. Sometimes the killer just has the kids up in the attic with him. He's usually in the attic.
Isn't there one where she goes up in a room and she checks on them and they're okay?
And then she pulls back the covers later and realizes that their throats have been slashed.
Yeah.
And the cover has been pulled up to their heads. Yeah, I've heard that one too. So,
have you checked the children?
all these previous stories we talked about are because people are uncomfortable in their cars. What does this one say? Is this a message to parents not to hire babysitters and just stay in and watch their own damn kids? Don't leave their home vulnerable to a stranger? Or is this a moral message to babysitters saying, be more responsible?
I think it's more so that one.
Yeah, don't slack around when you have a job to do.
Yeah, I think it's not so much be more responsible, but it'll also be more respectful.
Yeah, of other people's homes.
Of other people's homes. I think that's really what it is. If you're a teenage babysitter and you're going over to babysit someone's kids, you should be responsible for the kids, respectful of the home, don't go through and raid the fridge, and because if you do...
a killer will sneak into the house and murder the kids. The logistics don't make a lot of sense. When does the killer get into the house?
Well, isn't some versions of it, there's fire next door or something, and...
Oh, no, I've never heard a variation
I thought I heard a variation where there's like fire or some kind of chaos in the neighbor's house. So like all the attention is drawn and then the killer sneaks in and...
Oh, interesting.
And is there before the babysitter gets there.
Oh, I've never heard that variation.
And then I think I heard one too where like he climbs down the chimney or something too.
Oh, that would be great. Involve Santa Claus in there. This is another extremely well-known urban legend. You hear this one a lot. If they're telling a spooky story in a movie and it's not the hook, it's usually this.
It was in When a Stranger Calls.
Yeah, When a Stranger Calls, basically the first 10 minutes of that movie, which are really the only parts of that movie anybody remembers, is the legend as it is. I like When a Stranger Calls, but really, those first 15 minutes are so strong, the rest of the movie is kind of uninteresting.
What about When a Stranger Calls Back?
Yeah, have you seen When a Stranger Calls Back, the sequel?
No, I have not.
I've seen it. It was pretty...
Lame?
It was a TV movie, so it was very dry. But it was cool because they did get Carol Kane and Charles Durning back. Charles Durning, who just passed away last year. Original Black Christmas has a variation on this. The killer in the attic making obscene phone calls certainly owes something to this. There are a couple of urban legends about babysitters, because there are two stories I think are probably related to this one. The first of which has the babysitter goes over and watches the kids. And the parents tell the babysitter, check the kids every 15 minutes, which seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Every 15 minutes she goes upstairs and she looks into the kids' bed. Kids are sleeping fine. But
Well, I don't know. 15 minutes is a little overprotective. I would say like a half hour to an hour.
Whatever. The babysitter, who is always female, by the way, in these stories. I've never heard a variation with a male babysitter.
The time that this was probably...
It was the women's job to take care of the kids.
But I mean, most babysitters were primarily...
Teenage boys got jobs at their dad's auto shop or whatever.
This comes from like, what, the 50s?
Yeah, it dates back to the 50s. A slight variation of the killer in the attic story. He goes up to check the kids, and the kids are sleeping fine, but there's this really creepy clown doll sitting in the chair. Every time she goes to check on the kids throughout the night, it seems like the doll moves. She's not really sure if it's moving. It's a really creepy clown doll, because dolls are creepy and clowns are creepy. So if you combine the two, it's super creepy. Anyway, at the end of the night, the parents call, how are the kids doing? And the babysitter says, oh, the kids are doing fine, but that clown doll in the bedroom really creeps me out. We don't have a clown doll. Apparently, a murderous madman has snuck into the house, dressed up in a clown costume, and has been waiting to make his move all night. And
Is it a midget?
maybe. Either he kills the kids or kills the babysitter, or the parents come home and finds everybody dead. It varies. Sometimes it's not even a clown doll. Sometimes it's a statue of an angel in the front yard, which is this story has really developed legs because now it's becoming internet creepypasta. And so now people are posting this on image boards, and the version I've read on the internet is a statue instead of a clown doll. But the clown doll is creepier. And the clown doll version was copied pretty much scene for scene in a movie called Amusement. Did you see that one?
No.
It was another anthology film kind of inspired by urban legends. It wasn't particularly good, though. And that one doesn't seem to have any moral. Clowns are spooky. That seems to be the moral of that story. Another babysitter-related story, and this one has a very specific cultural checkpoint. The parents go out for the night and leave their infant child. What parent leave their infant child with a babysitter? Leaves their infant child with a babysitter who is a long-haired hippie. She's watching the baby, and she takes a hit of acid. As she's tripping balls, one of the things she does is takes a turkey out, puts the turkey in the oven, turns it on, and cooks this turkey. When the parents call, they ask her what's going on. She says, oh, I'm cooking a turkey for dinner. Parents go, we don't have a turkey. What happened, obviously, is in her crazy drug-fueled insanity, she's cooked the baby in the oven. Oh my god, hippies are gonna cook our babies! If your kids do acid, they're gonna cook your baby. That's the moral of that one is pretty obvious. This was obviously a cultural reaction to the youth movement at the time, but apparently you do still hear this one from time to time. Kids don't do acid these days. College students do, but not babysitters. Do you want to tell this one, JD?
Guy goes down the street, picks up date. In some variations, it's like a date in a club he finds, and then he takes her home. They have a decent evening. And then he wakes up in a bathtub full of ice with a note
that says, call 911 now.
Yeah, call 911 now. And he finds out that his kidneys have been stolen, and he later dies.
Or sometimes the cops come and rescue the guy and tell him that there's this criminal organ trading
black
ring,
market thing.
Yeah, that are going around and drugging people and stealing their kidneys. It's frequently set in a foreign country. It's set a lot of times in Brazil or Asia.
I've always heard it as being in New York.
Okay, well, I've heard variations set in places like Las Vegas and New Orleans, cities that are known for their sometimes decadent area. He meets a girl in a club, he meets a girl for a dating service.
He picks up a hooker.
He picks up a hooker. But usually this seems to be a story about men, be careful what you stick your dick in. Don't sleep with strange women. I was reading about this just last night. The most recent variation of the story is people get a job offer through the internet, or they leave a flyer on their car, and they go to investigate this job offer, and it's really this organ trading that are drugging people and cutting them open and stealing their organs. Scientifically, that is impossible. If you get your kidneys cut out, you're going to die immediately. You're not going to live to wake up in a bathtub full of ice.
So they only take one kidney.
They only take one kidney. You might be able to survive to morning. Major surgery like that is not something you want to perform in a dirty hotel room. And where do they get the ice? If they were in a hotel and somebody kept going to the ice machine all night, somebody would notice that. Or in the variations where they go to a foreign country, this is a xenophobic story. Don't go to foreign countries, you'll get your organs stolen. There is such a thing as a black market for organ transplants, but they're from dead bodies. I think one of the reasons this story endures beyond the moral is just the fact that it's kind of gruesome and creepy and gross, and people remember that level of ickiness.
Ickiness?
Kiss my ass, Jay. Now, was it in the first Urban Legends or the sequel where they did this? I seem to remember this being in the sequel.
No, I'm pretty sure it was in the first one.
Was it?
Yeah, because the second one had a lot more to do with college.
In Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, there's a moment that calls back to this where Jay fantasizes about waking up in a bathtub full of ice with a cut on the side of his body. I don't know if you remember the movie Touristas from a few years ago. That was pretty much the story. Apparently there's a movie with Miguel Ferrer called The Harvest, crime thriller that uses a organ black market as its setup. There's definitely a fear of surgery in this. I feel like that's an anxiety that people have. They go to the hospital, they trust doctors to perform on them, even though
I'm sure that's probably even a variation of that, is where they go to the hospital.
Yeah, the doctors are stealing people's organs. And a lot of people die in malpractice. That is the 6th or 7th most common death in this country. So you really probably should be more concerned when you go to the hospital. But I feel like there's a level of that too. And that's a justifiable anxiety, I feel anyway. All of these legends we just talked about are well known, definitely all around this country and probably all around the world. But now we're going to get a little more insular. And talk about local legends that are maybe a little less well known than the others. This next one is a favorite of mine because it's relatively local, like the Goat Man in Beltsville, Maryland. This is only about a 2-hour...
Do you know the Bunny Man?
I don't know the Bunny Man. I don't want to know the Bunny Man. This is only about a 2-hour drive for us to a little town called Clifton, Virginia, which is in Fairfax County. There's this very elaborate local legend. Now, the story goes, back in the 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s, on Halloween night, family man went crazy. He just snapped, and he hatcheted his whole family to death. He killed his wife and kids, and then he set up their corpses on the front porch of the house so that all the trick-or-treaters thought these dead bodies were just part of the Halloween display. The twist here is that he was dressed in a bunny suit, and all night he handed out candy to the kids dressed in a bloody rabbit costume. Now, eventually the cops come and they arrest him and they take him to a insane asylum. Now, the version I heard of this that's set in the 1900s has the town people petitioning to move this asylum out of Fairfax County because they don't want a bunch of crazies. So eventually they round up all the nuts inside of the nut house, and they put them on a bus, and they move them across town when there's a bus crash. Now, they round up all the crazies except for two. Two have escaped, one of which is this guy that dressed up in a bunny suit and killed his family. There is a real place in Fairfax County near Clifton, and it's a bridge overpass tunnel. The real name of the bridge is actually Colchester Pass, and it's a tunnel underneath a set of train tracks. Now, in the legend, around this area, dead rabbits, skinned rabbit pelts, start showing up in this area around the bridge. And after a while, the dead body of the second escaped person also shows up, his skinned body hanging over the tunnel. So the cops section off the area, and they find this insane man who's escaped, and he's wearing a suit of rabbit pelts, and there's a big chase, and he jumps on top of the bridge just as a train is coming through and gets squashed. Now, what happens next? This becomes a ghost story. On Halloween night, every year, something happens. Sometimes the bunny man will appear and attack people with an axe. Sometimes a orb of light appears above the tunnel, and anybody trapped inside of the tunnel when that happens kids drops dead instant. Every Halloween at midnight around the Bunnyman Bridge become a local trip for kids, to the point where cops have now set up barriers so kids don't go around the bridge and mess around, which of course they're just trying to protect them from getting attacked by the Bunnyman.
Well, I mean, of course.
Now, have you heard this before I mentioned this, JD?
No.
You've never heard of this one before?
Nope, have not.
It's a pretty interesting story, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't like the Bunnyman? Not frightened by the Bunnyman.
Yeah,
it's interesting to me, and if you've seen pictures of the bridge at night, it is kind of spooky looking. It's a spooky looking tunnel. There's kind of a root in reality. In 69 and 70, there were a couple incidents where people reported being attacked by a dude in a rabbit suit. A pair of teenagers were sitting in their car when a guy in a rabbit suit with a hatchet smashed their window and yelled that they were trespassing. Around the same time where a guy in a rabbit suit walked on somebody's porch and was chopping into their pillar with an axe saying, "You're trespassing on my property." Now that seems to be the root of this really elaborate local legend, which I find quite interesting. And there are several YouTube videos you can look up of people taking videos of the Bunnyman Bridge. It's blatantly not true because there was never an insane asylum in Fairfax County.
Oh, it wasn't?
No, there never was.
Those low-down, dirty sons of bitches lied to me.
If urban legends say something about our culture, what's the moral behind the Bunnyman Bridge? What's the message there?
Don't play on the bridge.
It seems to be. That would be the most obvious one. The rabbit. That would have to come from reality because that's a weird thing. Why would anybody dress up as a rabbit to kill people? That seems like a strange thing to do. Rabbits aren't traditionally thought of as frightening, soft, and kind of harmless.
Unless you're not from the Buffy series.
Or Jimmy Carter, who's of course attacked by a rabbit.
Hear me out. What if it was to kill a rabbit from Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
That's a good reason to be frightened. And one of these days, I'm going to go up there. Probably with a friend, because I don't want to go there by myself.
Not this friend.
You don't want to risk it?
Because if hands go step out of the bridge, I'm done.
Now, here's another local spot for us, and this is in southeastern Pennsylvania, right on the Delaware border. Now, have you ever heard of the Devil's Road, JD?
A couple of days ago.
When I first mentioned it.
Yes.
Okay. The Devil's Road. It's a stretch of road. It's in Chad's Fort, Pennsylvania, and the road is called Cosart Road. And what's creepy about it is that the trees are growing away from the road itself. The branches are bending outwards from the road, which is weird. As you drive further down the road, there are a couple of landmarks there. There's a tree called the Skull Tree, because its roots seem to form the shape of a skull. There's a house. People look at the house from the road, claim that the windows in the house are shaped like inverted crosses.
Really?
Really. The legend is that this house, called the Cult House or the Devil House or Satanville, was owned by a group of devil worshippers who used to perform weird satanic rites on people on the road, grab people off the road and take them into their house and perform satanic human sacrifices on them.
Didn't they make a movie of this?
Not that I'm aware of. Sometimes they've even, supposedly the house was owned by the DuPont family, which is a rich chemical family in that area. And sometimes it's not Satanists. Sometimes it's evil occult conspiracy. The upper elite league of the world meet in this house to perform weird occult rituals.
The Illuminati.
Yeah, so it's the Illuminati. Sometimes it's the KKK that own the house and are performing executions in it. And there are legends that people see bloody handprints on road signs. Some of them say that the house itself has crows on the roof, and there's a statue of the devil on the front porch, which seems like a dead giveaway to me. Really, the real legend is that if you go on this road and you drive enough, eventually dead ends, and you have to turn around, and then you'll be chased by either red or black SUVs that are trying to run you off the road, and supposedly these are the Satanists either protecting the house or killing people so that they can abduct them and take them into the house. I read one that was funny. The radio station in that area plays satanic music. Sometimes there are even ghost stories. People have claimed to see ghost lights and orbs on this road at night.
Very interesting. I mean, it's a road.
It's this one location that looks a little weird, and people spun these crazy stories around, because the real reason the trees grow away from the road is because they were cut to go around the phone lines. Just for the record, there have been no confirmed sightings of Satanists or black trucks running people off of the road.
Well, of course not, because if the people die, they can't confirm the sightings.
Obviously. And if you want to look at this beyond just Googling it, it's actually featured in the M. Night Shyamalan movie The Village, which is the only reason to rent The Village.
That's not even a good reason.
Have you heard of Cropsy, JD?
Yes, isn't that the guy from The Burning?
Well, yeah. Cropsy is the boogeyman of Staten Island and the Hudson River Valley, upstate New York. At night, the camp counselors come into the cabins, into the bunks, and tells the kids this spooky story about an established member of the community. Usually he's a judge or he's a doctor. Something happened to one of his kids. Campers pulled a prank on him and his son died. Or maybe he was horribly deformed in the accident. Or maybe he's just always been obsessed with kids. Point is, he's out there in the woods. If he hated kids before the accident, he hates them even more now. Don't go out of your bunk because he's out there and he'll get you.
Reminds me, we did forget one major urban legend.
What did we forget?
The killer in the woods. The one that they always used to tell around the campfire. The campsite slasher.
I never went to summer camp as a kid, so I never experienced this firsthand.
Yeah, the summer camp killer.
I really feel like Cropsy is just a local variation of that.
Well, it's a local variation of that, of course, where you get your major horror franchise.
Friday the 13th is that in a nutshell. Wonder if this wasn't the inspiration for Jason Voorhees. I do wonder. It might have been. Could be. It would make sense. And there are variations. Sometimes he's just an axe murderer. Sometimes he has a hook for a hand. In The Burning, he uses hedge clippers. And sometimes it's not just Cropsy. Sometimes he's the Cropsy Maniac. It's just a story to keep kids in their bunks at night, really. It's no more complicated than that. But it's inspired several movies aside from The Burning. Madman is another 80s slasher movie, which came out the same year as The Burning and is almost the exact same story. Just this killer in the woods at night. Kids, don't leave your bunk.
Does it have that cool death scene in it?
No. I like Madman a lot, though. It's a more atmospheric, slower. It's less gory than The Burning. It's not as crazy.
Well, then what's the point?
Yeah, but it's good.
You and your atmosphere.
And they made a documentary a few years ago called Cropsy that attempted to explain the origins behind the myth, and they linked it to a real-life child abductor and convicted killer named Andre Rand that they claimed was the inspiration for Cropsy. It wasn't a very convincing documentary since the myth predates this guy.
The only last name that should come after Andre is too long.
On the West Coast, and I believe you pronounce this OJ or Owe, O-J-A-I. I'm going to pronounce it OJ. OJ in Ventura County, California, there's Camp Comfort County Park, which is a campsite. There's a road nearby called Creek Road, and on this road there's the stone bridge. Now, there's a legend associated with this bridge that in the 40s or 50s or 60s, a father and son crashed the car, and the son got out of the car as it burned, but the father didn't, and he was yelling out, help me, to the kid as he was burning in the car. Died, obviously, but the son lived, and he wandered off into the woods. And if you go up to the bridge at night and yell out, help me, the Char Man will come from the woods and attack you. And there are variations. Sometimes it's a married couple and the wife burns to death in the car, and it's the husband who is hideously deformed by the flames but survives. Sometimes it's a firefighter who gets burned to death in a blaze and is now out there waiting for people. Sometimes it's directly a ghost story. Sometimes it's just a maniac in the woods story. It's an interesting one to me because it really is like the West Coast variation on Cropsy. Very similar story. Like Bloody Mary, you have to invoke the killer, so it becomes a dare for kids to do. If Cropsy is supposed to keep them in their bunks, it seems like this one would make them want to come out of their bunks.
The moral of the story is don't be stupid.
That's the moral of all of these. Don't be stupid. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Don't have any notes on this one, but the Melonheads, this is another Lover's Lane interrupter. Kids go out in the woods and they stop and they make out, and instead of being attacked by a guy with a hook, or a goat man, or a bunny man, or just a general serial killer, they're attacked by deformed midgets with giant hypercephalic heads. There's a weird specific quality to this legend, that there was an insane asylum in the woods run by a guy named Dr. Crow, who performed experiments on children or deformed people to create these minions of his that our goal is apparently to interrupt high school boys' boners. Apparently seem to be their only goal.
I mean, if I saw one of them.
The version I've always heard was set in Ohio, but apparently there are ones in several different points in this country. There are a lot of local variations on the Lover's Lane interrupter. In New Orleans, they have a creature called the Grunch that does the same thing, that is kind of a Bigfoot, Chupacabra type thing. And so it's actually, there's a book inspired by the Melonheads called The Big Head by Richard Lee, I think is the name of the writer. It's a splatterpunk novel. It's supposed to be really fucked up and gory.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Wrapping this up. The last local legend we're going to discuss today. It's in the Pennsylvania area, so kind of close to us. And it's the story of the Green Man, or Charlie No Face. Have you heard this one, JD, before I told it to you?
No.
Variation of this legend is that a guy worked for the railroad or the electric company, and he was struck by a down power line, and it killed him. It killed him by hideously deforming his face, by burning his eyes out and his ears off and his nose off. And now his ghost haunts this tunnel. They call it the Green Man Tunnel. It's actually called the Corvette Tunnel, and it's in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. Now, what's interesting about this legend is that we know the actual reality to it, very specifically. There was a real guy. His name was Ray Robinson. He was born in 1911 and lived until 1985. He, as a young child, grabbed a hold of a trolley line, and it didn't kill him. It did hideously deform him, though, and basically burned his face off for the most part. He had no eyes and no nose. He lived a quiet life. He was a belt maker, and he worked out of his home, and he didn't leave the house during the day, but at night, he would go for walks along Route 351, and it's pretty clear to me to see how a real person became a legend, because kids were just driving along the road at night, and they would see this weird-looking guy with this hideously deformed face, and they would go home and tell their friends and their parents that they saw a ghost or a monster or a deformed person. And some kids did that. Some kids stopped, walked over and started talking to the guy. Supposedly there are stories of kids bringing him beers and cigarettes. He was a real guy. He really lived. This is urban legend ground zero. This is how a real person becomes a ghost story. And it's fascinating to me for those reasons.
My question is, I understand Charlie No Face.
Why is he called the Green Man?
Yes.
Supposedly, his skin had a greenish hue to it. Some people have said he didn't actually have green skin, he just wore a green walking suit, jogging suit. Most of the variations say that his skin had a green color to it because of the electricity. You want to see a picture of the guy, JD?
Sure, since we have the computer right here.
There's a black and white photograph of the real-life Ray Robinson. Now, this is a color photograph. That shows he really didn't have green skin.
How did he see?
He didn't. He walked with a cane.
Oh.
There you go. There's the real guy. So that's our little diatribe on urban legends. There were any favorites that we didn't talk about during this episode?
Can't remember the name, but there's just one hill, and if you put baby powder on your bumper, you have to put your car in neutral. But the ghost will supposedly push the car up the hill.
And then you can see the fingerprints. I'd heard that story before, but not in Harper's Ferry. I had heard it in Texas, called Steuben, I think was the name of the town. The real reason is because of some weird geological oddity in the land where the hill, it looks like it's on an incline, but it actually isn't. So when you feel your car being pushed, it's just going down the hill. But because of the local geography, it looks like you're on an incline and you're going up when you're really not.
Okay, well then how does it explain fingerprints?
Well, I don't know. I would say that's people elaborating on a real event, as people are wont to do. And there are others. There's the Choking Doberman, also the name of a book.
What about the dog in the microwave?
And that seems like something that actually might have happened. An old woman drying her dog in the microwave. If it happened, it deserved to happen to that woman because you're stupid. Or the one about the Mexican pet. The family goes to Mexico and they pick up what they think is a chihuahua, and when they bring it home, they find out that it's a rat. There's so many. The married couple go to the hotel where they have their honeymoon for their 20th anniversary, and they buy a porno, and they watch the porno, and they realize it's a videotape of them having sex on their honeymoon 20 years earlier. Well, what about the one with the woman that has the spiders in her hair? She doesn't wash her hair for a month, and spiders laid eggs in her hairdo, and...
Oh, the beehive.
Yeah, the moral behind that is pretty clear about vanity, and...
In all honesty, seems like it could happen.
I don't know if spiders nest in hair. They
I
generally...
don't know if they nest in hair.
They do like warm spaces, but usually that means behind your heater.
Wasn't there one where the woman is getting ready for her wedding, and she goes to several different tanning beds in one day?
And they cook her from the inside,
And they cook her from the inside out.
I've heard that one.
The husband said, "Do you smell fried chicken?"
Yeah. Alligators in the sewer is a pretty basic urban legend.
Or the... Well, that's cryptozoology, some can say it.
Well, what was that?
The lizard men.
There's a lot of crossover between cryptozoology. If you go to Wikipedia and look up movies based on urban legends, they give you a long list. And a lot of them are Bigfoot movies. I don't consider Bigfoot an urban legend because, of course, Bigfoot's real.
So the Loch Ness Monster.
Oh, yeah, obviously.
The Loch Ness Monster is an alien spacecraft.
It is.
Yes. But it never moves. Whenever they see it, it never moves.
It always moves. It always moves because when they run off to grab somebody and bring them over to see it...
Well, no, it descends.
Oh, it descends. It's an alien submarine.
It's an alien immersible spacecraft.
Unidentified aquatic object, a UAO. Doesn't have the same ring to it.
I think it's USO.
USO.
Unidentified submersible object.
Oh, is that the official terminology?
Seriously, I think it is.
This is obviously a topic we can return to because there are bunches more. And in the modern age, there's this thing called Creepypasta. Urban legend has evolved to survive on the internet. Now it's just horror fiction stories that people pass along to each other on image boards and YouTube videos and message boards.
Like Slender Man.
Yeah, the Slender Man is the mascot of the Creepypasta. So there's a big difference. Generally speaking, urban legends are...
Have a moral.
Or have a basis in reality. Why creepypastas are just works of fiction people have written to freak each other out. Now, urban legends, the intended audience is usually teenagers, while creepypastas are more for college-age slackers who spend too much time on the computer. A lot of them are about old cartoon shows and video games. Because that's what interests people who spend too much time on the...
Like you.
Like me. They're a related phenomenon, and we might do a creepypasta episode in the future. That could happen. No guarantees with this show. Anyway, I think that about wraps it up. If the viewers have any urban legends they want to pass along to us, we now have an email address. What's the email address, JD?
bangersandmash88@yahoo.com.
BANGERSNMASH88@yahoo.com. And we have a Facebook page. If you want to like the Bangers and Mash show on Facebook, you certainly may. Feel free to. Leave a comment on our Facebook wall if you want to.
Please, nice comments.
No! Half of the YouTube comments have been negative.
If you have a negative comment, please leave it in a tasteful manner. Don't just say, "Fuck you guys, you're stupid." Don't say stuff like that. Like, give us an actual reason why you disagree with something we said.
Constructive criticism is most appreciated.
Yes.
Working on an RSS feed and a website. We will have those soon. Hopefully I can get that to work. Until next time, I am Mr. Bangers, a.k.a. Zach, and my co-host is...
Mr. Mash, a.k.a. JD.
And this has been the Bangers and Mash Show. And remember, kids, it's all true.
Dun, dun, dun.
I remember a night like this a few years ago. A guy and a girl went out driving. It was one of their first dates. Started out kind of casual, but they ended up deciding to go park. Not too far from here, as a matter of fact. Well, they're going at it. Listening to the radio, all of a sudden, a news bulletin broke in. A dangerous lunatic has escaped from the hospital for the criminally insane at Two Pines. They described him as a monster, 6.5 feet tall, 260 pounds, with one horrible distinguishing feature: a sharpened stainless steel hook where his right hand used to be. That was enough for the guy. He slammed the car into gear, floored it, bounced off a tree, didn't stop till they got to the girl's house. Got out of his side, walked around to hers. There, hanging in the door, covered with blood, was a stainless steel hook. The strangest part is that after all these years, after the biggest manhunt in Two Pines history, they never found the killer. Some people say he's still up here in the woods, waiting for the chance to kill again. And I say they're right.